Hey everybody, welcome to 3 Things I've Learned with me, Susan Dolci, where we share the stories that shift our souls. Well, it's the big day, it's election day, and regardless of what side of the aisle you stand on, I hope you voted. And it's not just a right, but it's a privilege, and everyone's vote matters. So, in full disclosure, we're actually pre-recording today's show because, to be honest, I have no idea how long I'm going to be standing in line to vote. And of course, I had the option to mail in my ballot. But if there is anything that is worth my time to stand in line for, regardless of the weather conditions here in Michigan, it's to cast my ballot. None of us really know what Wednesday tomorrow is going to look like. It could be days or weeks before we know the outcome of this election. But if there was ever a time that we needed guidance on how to have grace-filled political conversations, it's now. Today, I have the honor and privilege of chatting with Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers, creators of the podcast Pantsuit Politics and co-authors of their new book, I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, a guide to grace-filled political conversations. Before turning to the mic, Sarah wrote about parenting and politics on her blog, Bluegrass Redhead, and her writing has also been published on The Atlantic, The Huffington Post, Scary Mommy, and Blogger. Sarah received her BA from Transylvania University and her JD from American University's Washington College of Law in DC. Beth also received her BA from Transylvania University. I think they were sorority sisters, if I remember correctly.
That's true.
And received her JD from the University of Kentucky College of Law. When Pantsuit Politics and the Nuanced Life podcasts outgrew their status as hobbies, she left the firm and opened her coaching practice. She was one of Cincinnati's 40 under 40 business leaders, that's a big deal, and named one of Ohio's most powerful and influential women in 2017. Hey ladies, it's good to have you here with me today, and I am so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedules to be on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
I had to go into my daughter. So I have one daughter who's actually in politics. She's a digital media director of digital media for a small boutique firm. And I have another daughter who's studying poli-sci in Boston. Anyway, I went next door to my daughter's room and I'm like, tell me not to be nervous. Tell me not to be nervous. I hope you guys, I was like, I should ask him, has there ever come a time when you're interviewing somebody and you're not nervous? But do you get past that? Is that a thing?
Well, it just depends on who it is. We interviewed Senator Warren last week, and we were both really nervous just because we have an enormous amount of respect for her. Nerves, I think, is a compliment for sure.
Well, absolutely. I'm nervous, so it's a compliment.
Don't be.
So for our listeners that aren't familiar with Sarah on the left and Beth on the right and your podcast, Pantsuit Politics, can you take a little bit of time to share why you decided to create that show?
I think we wanted to have conversations we weren't seeing anywhere else. Your options were cable news, which was sort of partisan talking points, not any real conversation as far as engaged listening or grace or nuance with regards to problems and solutions, more just the approach that my particular political position has the monopoly on being right, and you are a threat to the future of the nation. And we really were tired of that and exhausted by it, but felt like this stuff was important because the option felt like you could engage that way or you could opt out. And we really wanted to present a third approach where we move forward and we acknowledge that this stuff is important and that it is hard and that we don't always have all the answers, but that the act of listening and engaging with these really intense topics is worth it in the end.
Yeah, I think that's where we started, that sense of left, right, but how can we have a more interesting conversation? You know, the political landscape has evolved since we started doing this 5 years ago, and so have our positions. So I don't call myself Beth from the right anymore, because I have shifted as the landscape has shifted. And what keeps me interested in doing this is how many people tell us that our podcast is a place where they feel invited into the conversation and empowered to go out and do their work in the world. So even if you listen to the show and never agree with a thing that either of us say, I hope you feel respected and like you learned something that would send you out into the world with a better framework for your own opinions and doing what you think is right in the political sphere.
Yeah, one of the things that attracted me to it is I always kind of called myself a Republicrat. And because for me, it was really about which candidate, if when we're looking at elections, I mean, there's elections, right? And there's policy. And I think people get those things confused a lot. But I would say I was more of a Republican most of my adult life until this last election, which kind of changed everything for me. And it was really hard. It was really hard to watch friends and family make choices that I just didn't understand, and being afraid to have those conversations, like terrified of those conversations because I didn't want to, poke the bear. You know what I mean?
I was talking to my 5-year-old last night. We were watching a senatorial debate, and she was asking lots of questions, and we brought up this is the Democrat, this is the Republican, and she said, "What am I?" And I said, you don't have to be anything yet. You get to decide that later, and then you can redecide if it changes and you change and you want to do something different. So what's so exciting is that you're an independent now, and in some senses you always will be until you decide otherwise. And so I think just that sense of like holding everything loosely is important, and starting from the beginning, recognizing that if I am secure in that, then I am less afraid of those conversations, because I can go in and say, yeah, I've had that perspective before. I really see that. I really value it. My dearest friend is such a passionate Democrat. And so she's really helped me understand, how you can see the world through that perspective. And then you can just find enough space between yourself and the conversation that it's not scary anymore.
Well, and one of the things, and we're going to dive into the book, but one of the things that is an overarching theme is that it's important that we have these conversations instead of avoiding them. That people are running from these conversations, like I said, because I was afraid. I didn't want to piss anybody off, as opposed to coming in with an open heart and being ready to listen and engage, because we're just shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't talk about it.
Well, I think people want engagement without any risk, and that doesn't work in politics or really any place in life. Engagement involves risk. It involves discomfort. You will be uncomfortable. You will be angry. Your feelings will get hurt, but you will grow through that process. It's ultimately worth it because we don't really have another strategy. We don't really have another option available to us. We can take cynicism and just opt out of the process. I don't think anybody's happy with where that has taken us. Because it is important that we all participate, or the loudest voices, the most ideological voices, the most strident voices occupy the space. And so the importance of engagement, because it's not without risk, but the risk is worth it, is something that we all really need to keep front of mind.
Yeah. There's just so much. So y'all, I have to tell, when I say y'all, all the listeners, this book has been I've been schooled, because it's not about, I mean, I understand basically they have like 10 rules of engagement, what I'll call rules of engagement in the book. And we're going to talk probably about the first 3, because you need to go buy the book and you need to read the book so that you have a plan. But what I love about it is you guys really do sort of map out how to start the conversation, how to handle it in the middle, and how to get, like you said, to being okay with the uncomfortable parts. One of the things that you start with that I love is that we have to take off our jerseys. I love the sports analogy. Can you explain what you mean by taking off our jerseys?
Well, when we wrote the book, which we wrote in 2017, early 2017, we were thinking a lot about how team sports analogies are used in politics constantly. And we kind of behave, Democrats and Republicans, with no disrespect to our friends who are libertarians or in the Green Party, or otherwise. But we kind of behave, Democrats and Republicans, like two teams. Like, you put on a jersey, this is my team. Especially through the 2016 election, doesn't matter if my team is doing something brand new that it's never done before, or doesn't sound like my team used to. It's still my team and I'm loyal. And we play against the other team, and our objective is to beat the other team. And what we really want from politics is not a space where one team dominates another, but a space where we're all working together to do a little bit better for everyone's benefit. And as individuals in that space, we don't want to be putting on one team's jersey and identifying with them until the bitter end of things. We want to be constantly improving this place that we share together, and finding moments when we can find real commonality with people in that space, and then maybe real commonality with people on another issue, different people. And we're contributing to it instead of bringing this sense of, I have to defeat them, and that is my reason for being.
You also gave, I'm trying to think, I didn't put this in my notes, but there are so many words that when they talk about politics, it's like, oh gosh, I'm coming at a loss. But
yeah, we want to put points on the board, right? And
exactly. Thank you.
Yeah,
right. There's so much. The semantics around politics is so much about like sports analogies and stuff like that. I was like, I never even thought about that before. It's like, anyway, it's a good time to take a quick break. You're listening to 3 Things I've Learned with Susan Dolci, and we are here with Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers, and we will be right back. Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's election day. This is a big day. I hope you're voting. I hope you voted. My guests today are the creators of the podcast Pantsuit Politics. Say that 3 times fast. And the authors of their new book, I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. Before we get more into the deep end of this book, which I love this book, can you share with my listeners where people can connect with you online, where they can get the book and listen to the podcast?
You can get the book wherever you get books. You can listen to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on all the platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcast, Overcast. And we are very active on Instagram and Twitter. Those are our primary social media channels. And our website is pantsuitpoliticsshow.com, where you can find all that information, plus sign up for our weekly email.
And the email, which I'm gonna give a spoiler in here. What's so cool about their newsletter, guys, is that they include listener feedback, or like, so you feel like you're really a part of the podcast, a part of the process, and not just, some like floating head out there. So I think that's really cool, you guys. So we were talking about, before the break, we were talking about that we have to take off our jerseys. This isn't a win-lose situation. And then the second thing that you address is we have to start talking about our values. We have to talk about why these policies, why these candidates are so important to us. And I don't think anybody spends a lot of time on that. I know a lot of people probably choose their party because that's what their parents did, because they grew up that way and that's all they know. And they don't necessarily choose to explore why. So why is why so important?
Well, because politics is an exercise in values and an exercise in power. If we're going to use our power or let other people speak for us, which is another form of power, we need to be really clear on why. Like, what is motivating us? If you are opposed to the welfare system, why? What life experiences motivate you? If you are opposed to abortion, why? What life experiences, what religious teachings motivate you? Not because you should change your mind. I mean, the stakes are high. Sometimes people will win and sometimes people will lose. This is, when we talk about conversation about politics, it become amorphous, but we don't ever want to imply that there are not real stakes at hand here, because there are. But because there are, we want to do this better, because how we're doing it right now is not getting at the problems where the stakes are really high. We're not addressing climate change. We're not addressing the holes in our institutions, particularly flaws that have been exposed by COVID-19. And that's what we want, right? We want forward movement. And so hopefully, if I can articulate what motivates me, either you'll better understand my concerns and maybe we can find a solution that addresses my concerns and still move us forward. Maybe we'll understand that we're not really that far apart, that we're both motivated by a concern that our children's future will not be more secure than our own. But if we are only operating out of fear, if we're only reacting to one another and never responding to one another, then that doesn't just make us feel bad. It is an impediment to progress. And that's what we really want.
Beth, do you have something you want to add to that? Or?
Well, I think the only other thing I would add is that politics are also about priorities, and being able to say why something is a priority to you really can advance the conversation. Some of the biggest fights that we have in this country, I think, are less fights about values and are more about what I think is most important at this time. Maybe in the future, maybe if I thought that our economy was in better shape, I would want to address this issue that you're talking about. Maybe, but we aren't able to say that very often. And if we can just make explicit what is behind some of what we're so passionate about, like Sarah was saying, we can have a much more interesting discussion, and one where we, even if we still are in very different places by the end of it, we can say, I see where you're coming from, and I see maybe what pieces would need to move for us to come a little bit closer together on this.
One of the things I found really inspiring was your whole concept on primers, which is the idea that before you come in to have the discussion, whether it's on your podcast or if you're going to talk to somebody, is to learn the facts behind that policy. And as I was reading the book, I was like, where do you go for the facts these days? Like, no, seriously. And I asked my husband, I'm like, so if I were going to ask you about the Affordable Care Act, or the history of healthcare or whatever, where would you go to get the facts? And so I have to ask you guys, where do you go to get your facts? Like, I know what I consider to be, because I get most of my news from reading. I read. I'm not the TV person, not anymore. So where do you find them? Where do you go for the facts?
Well, we always tell people
Go ahead.
The presence of bias does not mean an absence of fact. You can believe that the New York Times has a bias and their opinion page perhaps does, but that doesn't mean that the reporting does not convey any facts. The issue isn't what source, but maybe just not depending on a single source, right? Now, if I'm starting from scratch on something and I really want to learn the history, then I do depend on a lot of sort of more academic texts. Like, I want to hear from historians. I don't want to hear an opinion piece about the history of healthcare. I want to read from a historian. I really like the Congressional Research Service, and that's something anybody can access. That's the people who put together the research for Congress. And I think, I know Beth depends a lot on think tanks, and they can be really helpful. But I start a lot of my research with podcasts. I will, like, whatever I'm want to start thinking about, I will search that in Apple Podcasts and just see what, like, individual episodes come up, because maybe I'm going to stumble upon a perspective that's not mine that will be good and push me in positive directions. Just to start thinking about it. But we both take in a wide array of news sources with regards to news when we're not individually researching something. I listen to NPR, I read the New York Times every morning, I read Axios every morning. And I don't mean the entire papers, I mean their, like, email newsletter with the headlines, because I think it's fascinating to see how they prioritize certain headlines. And also, you're just going to learn more information over time, because it's not like it's brand new stories every day. I mean, we've been talking about COVID-19 since February, and I've learned a lot just from reading, the top headline every day, or whatever the case may be. So I think this idea that I'm going to push back, because I think there's this narrative that facts are not available, and I just don't think that's true. I think the opposite. I think it's that we have so many facts, sometimes we have problems delineating what to pay attention to. Yep. But I give a lot of benefit of the doubt. I think there's disinformation without a doubt. But I think there is lots of easily accessible resources if you want to learn more about a particular topic, including Wikipedia, which I actually love. I feel like Wikipedia is the achievement of what we thought the internet was going to do. But so I think that that's just the key, is like not to become cynical. It's a healthy skepticism is well placed, but cynicism and that the truth is not available to us is, I really, and I'm not saying that's what you're articulating, but I hear that a lot in conversation.
Yeah, I think more. I had a conversation with a friend several months ago, and it was more of the, check your sources, like understand the bias of where you're getting your news from, because I my degree was in broadcast journalism, and so it was like you had to read Christian Science Monitor, the Washington Post. You had to all these news sources every day to get to form a well-rounded opinion on a story before you wrote it. And there's so many news sources these days that seem to be, their intention is not to educate and to share the news. It's to change your mind or scare you.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really important to know kind of, am I in an opinion piece or a piece of journalism? And I think that we've done a poor job separating those things out, especially in the internet format. It's really hard to tell what you're reading. And so making sure you're aware of what you're reading is important. I also think we have to understand that the pace at which news moves now is just going to involve some screw ups. And so I'm always looking too at which outlets are holding themselves accountable, who's printing a retraction and what does it look like. I really value that the New York Times is writing some of the most scathing criticism of itself among all the newspapers right now. That tells me that they are trying to get it right, and they are trying to turn that critical eye inward to make sure that they're doing that. I love Wikipedia also, and think the footnotes in Wikipedia are a great place to get research started on almost anything. And the one other source I would recommend, and I think this is always a good gut check, especially when you feel like you're stuck in that opinion zone on a topic, is going to international papers, like, and international news outlets. The BBC does some great reporting on American politics, and they don't take for granted elements that our reporting does sometimes. So especially if you want like the foundational aspects of what's happening, sometimes getting that from a place like BBC is more helpful than starting with an American outlet.
And it always fascinates me to get to see their opinion of what's going on in the States. It's always like, oh, they think that about us. Okay, that's interesting. Like, I had no clue that we were held in that regard. Anyway, we're going to take another short break. We have so much more to talk about nuance and grace. We're talking with Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Three Things I've Learned. I'm Susan Dolci, and we are talking politics again, but I love it. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. We're a very political family. As like I said, I have 2 kids in politics. So one of the things that I want to bring up that you also talk about in the book is how specific words can really matter. So one of the examples was Obamacare versus the Affordable Care Act, and how people were so against Obamacare. But if you rephrase it and you say the Affordable Care Act, or like, accessible healthcare for everyone, they're like, oh yeah, I want that. Words matter.
Yes, absolutely, because I think that they are symbols of fear. Sometimes they're symbols of our value. We try to use them as shortcuts, but I think they put us in a space where we're again reacting instead of responding to one another. So we advise people a lot to do reflective listening. Okay, what I hear you saying is that you are afraid our country is headed in the wrong direction. I don't feel that fear. Why do you think we're so far apart on that? Or what I hear you saying is that you felt like Obama didn't understand you. Can you help me understand why? So I think that just articulating back to people what they are saying can help get past some of those word mismatches, right? And so that we can make sure, because there's so often we're not talking about the same thing.
Exactly.
I had a long conversation last night for an event about abortion. And that's, I think, one of the spaces where that happens the most, because we're trying to talk about theology and ethics and morals and medicine and politics all at the same time. Those are very different arenas, right?
Yes.
And so if we can't level set and say, are we talking about this as a moral issue, or are we talking about this as a policy issue? Because those are different. And I know that we would like to see them aligned 100% of the time, but we live in a pluralistic society. That's impossible. And so if we're not all going to agree, then how can policy help us? If you don't want to talk about policy, that's fine. We can talk about ethics or morals or religion, but let's just make sure we're all talking about the same thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Beth.
I was just going to say, I also think this is a good illustration of how uncomfortable most of us are in political conversations, just admitting we don't know something. When you think about these phrases that if you ask people in the street, what do you think about the Iran agreement versus the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action? Like, most of us cannot keep up with what's in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Most of us cannot keep up with what the Trans-Pacific Partnership started to look like, and that is okay. It would be good and healthy for us to be able to just acknowledge that. Like, I don't really know what Common Core is about. I can't have an opinion on that today because I don't really know. Are you interested in learning more? Not really. That's fine. Then let's give some space around that. But instead, I think we just try to listen for a trigger word that tells us like what our partisan identification would have to say, so that we can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down without additional exploration.
My husband and I got into it was a semantics issue. And again, why words matter. And it was about privilege, not necessarily white privilege, but privilege. And I said, our kids are privileged. And he got very upset. He was like, our children are not privileged. We've worked hard so that they could have the things that they have. And I said, okay, I think it's the word privilege. I said, so would you say they have an advantage? Well, yes, they have an advantage. So it's okay to have an advantage. So yes, because we have worked hard to give them an advantage, but privilege is bad. Yes, privilege is bad. Advantage is good. I'm like, it's the same thing, because that one word carries so much baggage with it. And I was like, you have to separate the emotion from the word, and put some space between that to understand that, look at the definition of the word, look at why that word was chosen to be used in the first place. So I can see where conversations get fired up really fast because there's like a trigger word.
I think, well, first of all, one of the best definitions I've ever heard of white privilege is not that you have not tried hard, that you have not worked hard, that you have not overcome barriers. It's just that your race was not one of them. Your race was not an impediment to your success. That is a thing that you did not have to overcome, people's prejudices about the color of your skin. And so I think what often happens is that we are operating in two spaces, and the matrix that I have recently felt like is motivating so much of America is an individualistic mindset versus a community mindset. And I think that there is an individualism that infects so much of what we talk about. And I say infects because I think it's a negative. And that's the undercurrent of everything, is it's all up to me. I have worked hard. I have to do it myself. My personal success is a reflection of my personal worth, instead of we are in this together. We have problems that no individual can solve, including the President of the United States. And it will take all of us connected to one another in order to move forward. But there is a strong strand of individualism in American politics. And it is even stronger in certain geographic areas of the country and in certain partisan mindsets that I think really, because politics is about what we're going to do together. So if you have an individualistic mindset that it takes some of us coming together to solve these problems, then that's why you don't trust the government, because the government is not individualistic. The government is community minded. And so if you think anything that threatens that individualism is a threat to liberty, then working together for solutions that everybody has to pitch in on, like there's just going to be sort of an inherent conflict to that conversation. And I think that's like the undercurrent so often when we're having conversations about healthcare or reproductive rights or masks. This sort of is this should I be looking out for myself and myself at all costs, or am I taking my neighbors into account?
And that's the other perfect segue.
That I think is like, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I just was like, I wanted.
The other aspect of that to me is like intention versus effect. Right. I think that's the other resistance point to a conversation about privilege, because when someone recoils at being told that they have privilege, I think sometimes what they hear is, and you intended to leave other people behind. Mm-hmm. You intended to use that advantage against other people, when that's not what's being said at all. It's just that, yes, there is the effect because of your privilege of other people being left behind. When you don't wear a mask, I know you don't intend to harm other people, but that effect could very well exist. And we have a hard time recognizing that our intention does not control the effect of everything that happens to, because of, and around us.
And that's what I'm sorry I interrupted you. I was like so excited about this perfect segue because that's what one of the things we don't realize is that we're looking at people, and this, to quote you from the book, they're not walking opinions and ideologies. That you're a human being who hopefully has the best intention, wants the best for our country, wants the best for their neighbors, and that I need to put politics, or keep politics in its place, is what you say in the book.
Yeah, this is the piece of the book that I struggle with the most in hindsight, because it is at the same time what I feel most passionate about of what we wrote, and where I think that we probably showed a lot of privilege and blind spot in the way that we communicated it. Because as Sarah said, there are very real stakes attached to politics. Elections have very real consequences in people's lives. And I fear that the framing of this chapter came across a little bit like, it'll all be fine. It's not the only thing in the world, no big deal. And that is not at all what we intend. What is in my heart about this topic is that if you center political disagreement in a relationship, that relationship will break down. That relationship has to have politics as one component of it, but not the only component. We need places where we really connect with each other. If we're going to stay in relationship with people where we have extreme disconnection, we need to understand that political solutions are not the only solutions available to us around certain problems, and we need to work hard in the other areas where we can to address those problems. So it's that politics are a very real thing, an important thing, a high stakes thing, but not the only thing, whether that's within a relationship or within a community. And holding on to, where does this fit inside this relationship, inside this community, inside this country, helps us have a healthier attitude as we engage in that very high stakes real work.
Well, and what's funny is like my orientation to that is really different, in that I just harped on individualism and how I think it's a cancer, but I think about this very individualistic, in that when I say put politics in its place, my politics is oriented under the values of my faith, which is that every single person is a child of God. And you can lose every single battle, and you can be oppressed, and you can be marginalized. And the reality is that you are still a child of God under my value system. And so to me, when I say put politics in its place, what I'm saying is, no matter how high the stakes are, there are things they cannot take away from you. The sun will still rise. The worth that you have as a human being is non-negotiable. There's no politics or policy that can affect your safety. It can affect your employment. It can affect things that are incredibly high stakes. But we cannot let the politics of oppression or the politics of marginalization define our worth for us.
Right.
When I look to to leaders of the civil rights movement their ability to stay focused on that hopeful vision, their ability to center, to understand that they were giving everything to a political movement. And also the paradox was that they existed above that plane.
Yeah.
They acted and spoke as if they were engaged in a battle that was much more than politics, because they were.
Yeah.
And because they understood that. It's like the way they articulated that this is high stakes, and also you cannot touch certain parts of me, no matter how oppressive your politics are or oppressive your policies are. And to me, that's what I hope that we had a running start at articulating in that part of the book. Not that, everything will be okay because you're a safe white lady, but like that no matter what, your worth as a human being cannot be defined by politics.
Exactly. Amen. Amen to that. And speaking of amen, when we come back, we're going to talk about the grace deficiency that's happening in our country. You're listening to Three Things I've Learned with Susan Dolci. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's election day. I keep saying that. I hope you voted. Your vote matters. Stand in line if you have to. We've been talking today with Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers. They are the creators of Pantsuit Politics. That's a podcast. It's awesome. You should go check it out. And they're also the authors of I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. And like I said, in the beginning of the show, they have like 10 rules of engagement for how to have grace-filled political conversations. And like I said, I'm not going to give them all away because you got to read the book. But halfway down, it's about giving grace. And you say that our country right now is suffering from a grace deficiency. What does that mean?
There are very few places where we give each other the benefit of the doubt. There are very few places where we walk into a conversation without a shred of defensiveness. There are very few places where we operate with a sense of security instead of insecurity. And I understand, I think, why that has happened, but I also think it's a choice, and that it's a choice we need to recalibrate on. And so for us, grace does not look like saying something other than I think you're wrong. You know, I feel like sometimes when we talk with people about this, what they hear is every opinion is equal. You are not allowed to tell me that I'm wrong. That is not what we mean. We mean, I think you're wrong, and I know you're still a human being. And I know that your value is equal to mine. And I know that you belong here. And I know that even when you don't deserve to be here, or when I don't deserve to be here, we still belong. And when we start from that fundamental place of we both belong, and in that space, we can disagree really vigorously, we have a higher quality discussion. The goal is not to make anybody less than. And I think that all political advertising right now is about making somebody less than, and usually about making you feel like more than because somebody is less than. And I think that's why we're all so unhappy with how things are, because we know in our guts that that's wrong. We know that's not who we're supposed to be. So we just talk about giving grace to yourself in the conversation. When you feel stuck, you don't know, you didn't say the right thing. Later, you think, I should have said this, just have a sense of grace for yourself. Yeah. And when the other person is saying things that you find demeaning, harmful, grotesque, you say to them, I hear that, and it feels to me to be demeaning, harmful, and grotesque. And I still want to talk to you about this. And I still want to stay here with you as we sort through this.
Sarah, anything?
I mean, I think that we do give the benefit of the doubt. We just give it real unequally. And grace means everybody gets the benefit of the doubt. I mean, some of this is psychological. We have an attribution error. If we screw up, it was the environment. If somebody else screws up, it was a flaw in their moral character. And so I think recognizing that we all do that, and recognizing that we are ready to give the benefit of the doubt to certain people, but not others, is a step towards grace. I think a lot of this is motivated by a very consumer culture that treats everything like it's a buying decision, including voting. I love that there's finally the meme out there that like, this isn't that you're not finding your soulmate. You're just finding the next bus stop. When you vote for a candidate, you're not looking for a soulmate. You're just looking for the person that's going to get the closest to where you want to go. Because I do think we treat politicians like products. And if if there's some flaw, that I'm gonna call customer service, I'm gonna be mad. And so I think that I think that there's this very consumer mindset that everything needs to be cheap and easy and make us feel good. And there's no allowance that like grace is hard. And you can give it without receiving it. And that it is an exercise, a daily exercise, and you're never done. You never get to check it off the list. You never graduate. I think that we have a real sort of efficiency mindset, productivity mindset that we take to our relationships, and we certainly take to politics. That we're gonna have to release our death grip on, because it's not getting us anywhere. And grace is, I think, adding a softness to how we treat each other, how we think about ourselves, how we think about politicians. I ran for office. I saw firsthand how we think about people who run for office. And if we want a different type of politician, then we're going to have to start talking about politicians in different ways, like they're human beings instead of the fact that they're TV characters, because they are human beings. Donald Trump is a human being at the end of the day. Like that, right? At the end of the day, that's what we have to think about. And it's really, really hard. And I understand that this is really difficult, emotional work, especially if you have a history of trauma, if you have a history of abuse. Setting boundaries is important, but you can set boundaries with grace too. I think that just avoiding the dehumanization, they are different from me, and therefore like they're less than me. Exactly like Beth said, I'm better because I'm not them. We just kind of have to be constantly alert if we want to continue to exercise grace with one another.
Thank you for that. Okay, so the name of the show is 3 Things I've Learned. And I usually ask my guests to share what they've learned, but you guys schooled me on all things grace-filled politics and conversations. So here are the 3 things I've learned. 1, politics is not a sport. It's not about winning and losing. This is our country. We should all want what's best for each other. It's time to take off the jerseys and talk about our values. 2, my why drives my decisions, and my why could only be a few words different from your why. The words matter. I need to trust in my neighbor's why, believing that he's also making choices based on his values, and that he only wants what's best for the country, even though we may disagree. At least I hope that my neighbor wants what's best. And 3, I need to commit to kindness. I need to prioritize being kind over being right. And to quote the book, remember that I am so much bigger than one election, one vote, and one law. Hallelujah to that. I've been talking with Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers. You can find them on pantsuitpoliticsshow.com, where you can listen to their podcast. You can order the book. I think you're wrong, but I'm listening. They have a blog, The Nuanced Life, and there's all sorts of other ways you can support them, and I do, and you get all sorts of special stuff when you do that. It's awesome. Sarah and Beth, thank you so much for being on the show today. My prayer is that we can get through this election with nuance and grace, and we can keep having these tough conversations. And at some point on my Facebook page, I want to get on and do a live and read your Wednesday part of the book. Like, there's going to be a day after the election day, and what does that look like? I remember that 4 years ago. It was a rough Wednesday.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to 3 Things I've Learned with Susan Dolci. If you're interested in more about the diamond process and my transformational coaching techniques, you can visit my website at susandolci.com, where you can sign up for a 3 30-minute clarity session. We all have a story to tell. We can live in the story, or we can transform the story. It's your choice. Change your story. Change our world. #StoryField. Thanks for listening, everyone.